Hey everybody, this is JDGaming, back today with a deck profile of Traptrix. Now, where do I even begin with this theme? Obviously, longtime viewers may recognize that Traptrix is one of my personal favorites to revisit from time to time, but it goes beyond just me loving this theme. Back in 2014, the Hand Artifact Traptrix or Hat deck was a format-defining force that did very well, even winning North American championships and such, and it really took something as huge as the 2015 Archetype pendulum era to shake things up enough to make Traptrix and the hat kind of theme fall out of favor. But there were reasons why this deck was so popular. Traptrix 𝗵𝗍𝖊𝖏 was an amazing monster, being able to grab the then limited bottomless trap hole, which was effectively your second solemn warning, and then you could leverage that into an Xyz card, which is very powerful back then because the rank 4 toolbox was king. Fast forward a few years and Traptrix 𝗵𝗍𝖏𝖏 busted open the potential of that very same rank 4 toolbox, giving players access to things like treacherous trap hole to destroy your opponent's setups as an offensive powerhouse before making your own play, because back then, much like coming up in April, you didn't have the restriction of link monsters and the extra monster zone for your extra deck cards. Looking at it now, even just compared to the last build of this deck, Traptrix and Traptrosera are welcome new powerhouse additions that this deck is going to fully leverage and just be a really cool pure Traptrix type of a theme here. And looking forward, the OCG actually had a poll for what type of deck would you like a structure deck for new support, and Traptrix was one of the fan favorite themes that ended up getting an Xyz monster because probably Konami had all that stuff planned out as part of that event. So lots of really cool stuff in the past with this strategy, lots of cool stuff now, and even more stuff down the pipeline, so lots of reasons to really love this theme. So I thought this was a pretty good choice to begin 2020. And even beyond that, I just love this theme aesthetically. One look at the thumbnail should show you just how much I love the vibrant colors of this theme. And this was the one theme that, as of now, I did kind of a pilot episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! In real life where I talk about the real world inspirations behind these cards. If you want to see that type of video, I have it linked up in the corner as well, because I just think it's a very cool theme. But enough gushing about this archetype. I really feel like this is a fan favorite theme, so I hope you guys find something interesting in a let's build of this. So I'm going to go through and explain my choices and kind of insight in what I feel is core to the deck, and then other cards that I put in here that maybe you want to tweak and change and customize into your own environment. What tech do you play against? What decks do you see more or less of? You know, you can go ahead and always change it to your liking, but this should be a good starting point for you guys, even if you're learning this theme from the ground up. But if you don't want to see any of that, you just want to see the list, feel free to click the description box down below. I always have a table of contents, and that timestamp by the A to Z profile is probably what you're used to seeing on other channels. But if you want to see the rest of the video or just skim through the various sections, I have timestamps there as well. But without further ado, let's build Traptrix. The first step in building any deck is to establish the theme and to build a core that supports the theme's goals. And although this time we're playing Traptrix again, we're starting off now with a new link monster that did not exist last time around. Here is Traptrosera, a powerhouse link 1 with 800 attack points from the Battles of Legends set most recently printed. Fun fact, all the Traptrix monsters have a stat sum attack and defense total of 2800. So based on Sera's 800 attack, you'd expect her to be pretty much like Traptrix 𝗵𝗆𝗏 with 2000 defense. Of course, link monsters don't have defense points and can't even switch out of their meager, in this case, attack position, so kind of bad in that sense, but her abilities more than make up for this. First of all, very easy to summon because any non-link Traptrix can go ahead and be turned into Sera, so very easy to access. She has a continuous ability that says when she's link summoned, she cannot be affected by trap effects, which means things like Torrential Tribute are now one-sided as long as all your other monsters are protected, which, as we'll talk about later, that is going to be the case. And then she has two abilities. They can't be activated during the damage step and can only be each used once per turn, but honestly, if it didn't have that restriction, it would be absolutely bonkers with how much advantage this thing is able to snowball. The first one says, if a normal trap card is activated, you can special summon a Traptrix monster from your deck with a different name from the cards you already control. Because we have cards like 𝗵𝗍𝖏𝖏 and 𝗍𝗍𝖏𝖏 that have abilities on special summon that get you more advantage, either by destroying your opponent's cards or setting your own trap cards back. This is already really powerful because you get a free monster and another free card effectively off of that summon. But as if that weren't enough, Sera's second ability says anytime your other Traptrix Traptrix monster's effect is activated, you can set a whole normal trap card directly from your deck. Again, a hard once per turn, but that same Myrmilio or 𝗣𝗍𝖏 can go ahead and get you another whole normal trap off of Sarah. Basically, as long as you keep this thing alive, you're getting tons of resources, which is the main draw of this type of strategy. So I just love Traptrix Sarah. We play 3 copies because, unfortunately, you can't always protect her, although that is the goal, and you do want to have her out at all times. Very briefly, I want to mention a card that usually I didn't play, but now we're playing 1 copy of Traptrix. 𝗵𝖄𝑇ℎ is in here because she's a main deck Traptrix monster that you could turn into Sarah, and her effect's very similar to Sarah. One common ability with all the Traptrix main deck monsters is that this card, along with the others, is unaffected by the effects of whole normal trap cards, so that's a nice bonus that everything has. But the main reason you play this at 1 is because it says if you activate a whole normal trap card except during the damage step, you can either add to your hand from your deck or just straight up special summon a Traptrix monster except a copy of 𝗵𝖄𝑇ℎ. Again, a hard once per turn, but this thing basically mirrors Sarah and supplements it by getting you yet another monster to get even more cards onto the field. And the fact that this is a Traptrix monster means in situations where you draw it, hey, just summon it and turn it into a Sarah as your first play, and you're not going to be any worse off than you were without playing this card. So next up is 3 copies of the old school powerhouse Traptrix 𝗣𝗍𝖏. This thing's got a 17/11 attack and defense. When this card's normal summon, you revive a Traptrix monster from your graveyard in defense position. So basically anything except Sarah. Even 𝗣𝗏𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖘 can come back for her protection abilities, which is very important to note. And this thing lets you leverage all your cards into bigger plays, which is why we need to play 3 of her. And then if she happens to be special summoned, you can go ahead and set a whole normal trap in your graveyard back to your field. It just gets banished if it happens to sit there until your next end phase. So 𝗣𝗍𝖏𝖏 is basically the advantage recursion that the deck needs in order to turn after turn bring back your monsters and keep making bigger boards. So next up is 2 copies of 𝗣𝗏𝖊𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖏, which is one of the biggest things that you will constantly summon off of 𝗣𝗍𝖏𝑇ℎ or off of just acquiring 2 level 4 monsters. This thing's got a weak attack of 300, but a pretty hefty defense of 2500. She has a lot of abilities, so brace yourself for this. The first is that her trap hole protection is actually protection from any trap effects while it has Xyz material. So if you combine this with Traptrix Sarah, both of those monsters are unaffected by Torrential Tribute. Then she extends protection to other Traptrix monsters, so those monsters cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects, and your opponent cannot target monsters for card effects. Again, 𝗣𝗏𝖊𝖓𝖓𝖏 can be affected, but the fact that you could summon her from the extra deck or graveyard so easily means as long as your opponent doesn't take advantage of getting rid of 𝗣𝗏𝖓𝖓𝖓 and then destroying your entire board, you should be okay. Then she has the final ability, which is the reason people played this, is a toolbox component in rank 4 decks. Once per turn during either player's turn, you could just detach a material from this card to send any whole normal trap card from your deck to the graveyard whose activation conditions are met. Just use this card's monster effect as if it were that trap. But you can already see how much protection this bestows. Now, Sarah can't be killed in battle, can't be targeted, can't destroy by card effects. It's unaffected by traps already. 𝗣𝗏𝖓𝖓𝖓𝖓 just gives so much protection to the theme. You have to try and establish this whenever possible. Not as much of a priority as the Sarah itself, but really in this build, for the first time, I feel like you're really taking advantage of all the protection effects that 𝗣𝗏𝖓𝖓𝖓 has because Sarah is our main engine to get us more and more cards. So I really like the 𝗣𝗏𝖓𝖓𝖓𝖓 at 2, not 3, just because I don't really ever summon the 3rd copy. Sometimes you're good with 1 just because you could revive it with 𝗣𝗍𝖏𝑇ℎ, but definitely at least the 1 copy, probably at least 2. 3 might be pushing it unless you don't need anything else in your extra, and that's kind of up to you how many you'd like to play. Next up, we have Traptrix Mantis. This thing was kind of iffy. I went back and forth in playing it up until the release of Sarah. In this deck, I usually just go Mantis into 𝗣𝗍𝖏𝑇ℎ because then when Mantis turns into Sarah, if you can keep the Sarah alive, your 𝗣𝗍𝖏𝑇ℎ is just going to bring back Mantis and then turn into 𝗣𝗏𝖓𝖓𝖓𝖓 to protect the Sarah or whatever beyond that first turn. It's just a monster with the Traptrix name that gets you your 𝗣𝗍𝑇ℎ or whatever else you may need at the time. It also has a bonus quick effect that lets you target one of your set spell and traps, clear it back to your hand, hand to give you room to set something else, and you can actually directly set a spell or trap as part of that effect, even during your opponent's turn. Unfortunately, much like Sarah, it does not waive the requirements of trap cards as a basic must wait one turn, so it's not quite that amazing, but it's able to clear out your 𝗣𝖊𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖘 trap card if you want to confuse your opponent or make sure that card doesn't get banished. So the biggest application of that quick effect really is the fact that even if you summon Traptrix Mantis off of Sarah during your opponent's turn, you can just activate the quick effect at any point in order to set another trap hole from your deck off of the Sarah. So the flexibility in triggering other cards is nice. It synergizes enough with 𝗣𝖊𝖊𝖓𝖑, but again, the biggest push factor that made me want to play this at 3 in this build is because Sarah is so important and you need to have access to a Traptrix monster in order to establish her in the first turn. So that's why we play 3 copies of Mantis. And then finally, for the main deck monsters that we're running today, or 3 copies of Traptrix Murmileo or Murmilio. I go back and forth with the names, kind of depends on how you like to pronounce Antlion here. But this card is not a stranger to anyone who's heard of this theme. It's a 16/12 attack and defender. Main ability of just search a trap card with hole in its name from your deck to your hand. Normal trap card, of course, but still very powerful, just Stratos-like ability for your defensive line. And then if she's special summon, destroy a spell or trap your opponent controls. The second ability is mandatory. Do note that that means that you have to destroy one of your opponent's cards. So if you don't want to, get slain by Ghost Ogre, you don't want to get, run into destroying one of your opponents and waking the dragons or something, just watch out for when you summon this. But in general, it's a very powerful card that has more advantages because of that than disadvantages. Quick note, I'm not playing a Trax in the main. I just feel like even with the need for Traptrix monsters, that card's not the best. Murmilio, Mantis, and 𝗣𝖊𝖊𝖓𝖑 all get you new cards. Sarah gets you more cards, and any of those 3 previous monsters can turn into Sarah. A Trax is more like a, if you play it in your side, I guess, if you don't have better options. It's cool that it can stop things from negating your traps. It's cool that you can use your trap holes as hand traps, but not necessary by any stretch of the imagination. You could definitely make it work. I just don't think it's the best option for how I like to approach this strategy. But again, ball's in your court. Feel free to use that card if you would like to. Next, I think it's a good segue from Murmilio into our Trap Hole lineup. We're starting off with 2 copies of Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare. This is a card you honestly could play 3 copies of. The only reason I'm not is Trap Holes already have this weakness of if your opponent has established a monster, it's not going to do anything. This thing is just like that because it requires your opponent to have special summoned the monster this turn and activates its ability on their side of the field. You would then negate that effect and destroy the card. Now, it's much more powerful and applicable these days because Nightmare Phoenix is going to trigger upon summon. Lots of Link monsters, another extract monsters do activate upon the turn that they're summoned or even on summon. So this card can snare so many more cards than when it was originally printed. But at the end of the day, this card is a very powerful searchable option. So I feel like 1 copy, you might not get full use out of it in your deck. 2 copies, you see it enough. You can access and you get the extra use if you really want. 2 copies also lets you trap trick it out, as I'll mention a bit later. But could you play 3? Probably. Do you need to play 3? That depends entirely on what you're planning to play against. Not the best if your opponent has already done something and made a play, so that's why I play the 2 copies of this. But I will note, despite me playing the fewest of this card, it is still one of the best trap holes, and that's why we're starting off with that. Next up, we're playing 3 copies of Bottomless Trap Hole, because this is this deck's Solemn Warning. Any monster that's summoned your opponent has, or monsters if they pendulum summon, with 1500 or more attack, just all get destroyed and banished. Is it as foolproof as before? No, that's why it's unlimited now, but still a very powerful option. One of the best just generic removal forms that you can have, and so I think it's worth playing at least a copy of this. Make sure you can access this. Arguably better, depending on the situation, would be Floodgate Trap Hole, which basically says when your opponent summons a monster or monsters, all of them go to face down defense position and they can't manually change their positions. Back when Link monsters first came out, people were afraid that maybe this card won't be so good anymore because Link monsters can't change the defense position, but you can trap things in the extra monster zone if your opponent plays Instant Fusion or something. You could just get rid of annoying threats that your opponent's going to summon. And honestly, when Master Rule changes happen in April and people start summoning more Fusion, Synchros, and Xyz, this card's going to stop any of those boss monsters unless they have an on-summon ability, which again, that's what that Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare is for. And the fact that it does not care how big the monster is, if it's an effect monster or not, just makes this the most flexible of all the trap cards, and that's why I would honestly say play at least 2, possibly even 3 of this thing. Now that we've talked about the Traptrix monsters and the whole normal traps, it's time to flesh out the main and extra decks. Starting off here, I want to begin with 3 copies of the Phantom Knights of 𝗤𝗵𝖏𝖊𝖐. This card is a trap that says you could special summon it as a normal monster in defense position. It is a level 4, which is awesome, and if you have no trap cards in the graveyard, so you draw this as your opening play, you can just set it and activate it the same turn. You can only activate 1 of these per turn, but this card is just so much more flexible than Instant Fusion. Originally, the thought process was, okay, I can turn any one of my monsters, normal summon it into Sarah, and I could start getting advantage. But what if I'm going second? I wanted a way to really just win the game, and that's where the Utopia package came in. So I was originally playing Instant Fusion, so I could just summon a level 4 like a Mud Dragon of the Swamp. That way I could go and overlay 2 of my monsters, including potentially the Instant Fusion target, into Utopia Double, who says upon summon, you can add a copy of Double or Nothing from your deck to your hand, and then if you do, upgrade it into a Utopia monster using its material as a material as well. You summon the Utopia, who has an ability, of course, that says you can negate an attack by detaching one of its materials. That combos perfectly with Double or Nothing, which is a quick play spell, normally garbage, that says when a monster's attack is negated, even by Utopia negating itself, you target that monster, and it can make a second attack during the battle phase, and if it does, its attack is doubled during the damage step only. Well, wouldn't you know, Utopia Double says the monster you summon off of its effect, double its attack. So it becomes 5,000 when you summon the Utopia, you double it again to 10,000, and if you attack a Link monster or some other attack position monster with 2,000 or less attack, you did 8,000 damage at least right then and there. So this was just the most appealing way for me to end games. If I'm going second, it's like, why play the game with trap cards that are a little slower and advantage when you could just surprise your opponent and end the game? All you have to do is not draw Double or Nothing. So that ended up being the big play. Instant Fusion still works, but I figured, well, if Instant Fusion is really doing that just to be a first turn I can play it immediately card, then 𝗤𝗵𝖏𝖊𝖐 does the same thing, because if I open with 𝗤𝗵𝖏𝖊𝖐, I can just play it before I play any other traps and before they land in the graveyard. So functionally, they did the same thing on that front. Ultimately, 𝗤𝗵𝖏𝖊𝖐 synergizes with the strategy more of establishing your Sarah. You have your first turn, get a free trap card as well. Maybe make an Xyz monster like 𝗣𝗏𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖐 right off of that to protect your Sarah. You could honestly play Instant Fusion in addition if you want more summoning power, but I feel like there is some value in only playing Double or Nothing here, because that also gives you the access to Imperial Order in the main or side and Sky Strikers or other spell heavy strategies. But to make sure that Double or Nothing is not dead in a 40 card deck, because let's be honest, you will draw it sometimes. I also like playing the 𝕿𝗵𝖐𝖑 Utopia Prime and 𝕿𝗵𝖐 Utopia the Lightning. This thing has an interesting ability that's very reminiscent of Chaos Emperor Dragon. Read it if you're curious, but it doesn't come up all the time. It's basically able to make a comeback victory if your opponent has 3,000 more life than you. It's able to get rid of a lot of monsters, but reason I play it is because of Utopia. If you draw the Double or Nothing, you can't search it off of Utopia Double anymore, effectively making that card dead. However, you can go straight into your Utopia, overlay that into Utopia Prime, turn all those into Lightning, so now you have 2 materials from the Utopia, 39 the original, plus the Prime and the Utopia itself. 4 materials allows Lightning to then pump its attack points up to 5,000 when it battles a monster twice, and it does have the ability that just prevents your opponent from responding whenever it battles attacks your opponent's monster, which is very powerful. That's kind of the alternative win condition. This deck does need a lot of power because 𝗣𝗏𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖐 and the other monsters don't have a lot of attack points, so the Utopia monsters are just an easy way to leverage free level 4 monsters into a win. And you could play 2 Double or Nothing and decrease your chances of drawing both of them, but then it also just increases your chances of drawing the Double or Nothing. I feel 𝕿𝗵𝖐𝖑 is a flexible enough toolbox option. You don't really care too much about the other cards in your extra deck. I was honestly at one point playing 𝗍𝗓𝗍𝖐𝗐𝑚𝑠 because of that. So this, I think, is my personal pick on how we make this deck win, because obviously the core of the deck is able to generate the advantage necessary to grind out the opponent. Next up, we have 3 copies of Traptrix. This normal trap card is a godsend for this strategy and other trap strategies. It says you could banish a normal trap from your deck except Traptrix and set a card with the same name directly from your deck, which basically requires you to have at least 2 of all your normal traps. So if you're playing any normal traps as tech, do keep that in mind. You want to play at least 2 copies just for this effect. Also, the card you set with this effect can be activated this turn. Yay, you're finally waiving the normal trap rules and can activate it. However, the caveat here is you can only activate 1 trap card for the rest of the turn after this resolves. So don't play this when you have a field of traps, otherwise you're going to lock yourself out and your opponent's going to be like, oh yeah, you just, red rebooted your own field. Save this for when your opponent is doing something really big, and then you could threaten them with something like Torrential Tribute. This thing I've alluded to before, but it works very nicely with Traptrix because it's one of the few normal traps that has a high enough impact to stop your opponent, especially after you've used all your other traps and kind of burned off their resources. Torrential works very nicely, especially because the Dsera's immune to trap effects, 𝗣𝗚𝖊𝖓𝖐 protects all your other cards and itself from being destroyed or affected by traps, so very, very flexible out. Still very powerful, especially when it's unpredictable and not searched by Traptrix. So that's why we play the 3. 2 copies lets you access it with Traptrix, 3 copies lets you draw into it somewhat often, and then that lets you go and surprise your opponent. Make up for the fact that it has its weaknesses, yes, but it's still a very powerful thing to be able to destroy your opponent's board in the middle of their combo. Next up, we have 3 copies of Lost Wind. You could play a lot of different trap cards. Heck, I'm even playing Infinite Impermanence in this deck in addition to this, but I want to feature Lost Wind here because it says, target a face-up special summon monster on the field, probably your opponent's monster, negate its effects, also its original attack is halved. That's huge for 2 reasons. Not only do you permanently negate the effects of one of your opponent's monsters that could threaten your game state, but you could also go and just make them weaker so that you can run over them with your own monsters. They become a lot more vulnerable, especially when you're playing something like the Utopia double combo to, now you can kill a monster with 4,000 or less attack and just win the game. Its other ability is when your opponent summons a monster from their extra deck, while this card's in your grave, accept the damage step, you can just set it back to the field. Yeah, you can't play it that same turn, and it does get banished when it leaves the field, but this is just another card that you activate one time, Dsera triggers it, now you set it back, then during your turn or any time after that, you can activate it again, very flexibly because it doesn't have a timing for that activation. Trigger Dsera again. Lost Wind is extra powerful in this strategy because it synergizes so well with the Dsera. However, monster effects are very, very powerful, obviously, and so that's not going to stop me from playing 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. This thing is basically the best hand trap for this deck because it directly causes all the effects to go off. If you didn't draw your Shade Brigandine and you're going second, your opponent has a board, you can activate this from your hand. You don't have to use it only during your opponent's turn, so don't forget that. It sets it apart from Veiler, and the fact that you're able to block a spell or trap in the column as well is a nice little bonus as well. At least 2 copies allows you to set it with Traptrix, especially because you could set it in whatever column you'd like and blanket with the Traptrix as well. Do keep that in mind. I do want to mention that so you don't forget for that extra use there. The last of the normal traps, I believe, in this deck is going to be 3 copies of Compulsory Evacuation Device. This card was absolutely nuts during Dragon Ruler format, and it baffles me that this card's unlimited and Book of Moon is still limited. This card just says target a monster on the field, doesn't matter whose it is, bounce it back to the hand, and that is powerful because searchable with Traptrix and triggers your Dsera at any time, lets you bounce back your own monsters. I've done that a lot of times because all your monsters pretty much have abilities when you normal summon them, so you can reuse those. Very flexible out, and the reason we play this thing is because it's one of the few cards that can get rid of your opponent's established threats on the field. Yes, Infinite Impermanence can negate things, same thing with Lost Winds, but sometimes you just want to get rid of that big monster you can't deal with, and Compulsory Evacuation Device helps you do that. So that's why we play the 3 copies of this. Again, at least 2, but I personally just love the 3 of it. And finally, for the main deck, we're playing 3 copies of Solemn Strike, the only non-normal trap card here, but it's just too powerful. This thing can preemptively get rid of monsters your opponent's trying to summon, but also get rid of your opponent's already established threats. If your opponent tries to negate one of your trap holes, and then you hit him with Strike, 1,500 life points is a joke, even in a deck that takes lots of damage through Dsera. And finally, we're going to talk about the rest of the extra deck. These are all just up to choice, but this is, I think, a good way of using the extra deck. I like playing 1 copy of Mrs. Radiant just because this allows you to summon more than just a 𝗣𝗚𝖊𝖓𝖐, gives your monsters more attack power, it lets you recycle a earth monster whenever it falls, so lots of flexibility. The extra deck's not too tight here, and I feel like it's got enough utility that it's worth considering. If you're playing like a Boral Sword or something, this is also a good way to leverage 𝗣𝗍𝖐 plus this into that monster as well. So I actually don't play any other Link monsters just because I honestly feel it's not worth all the time climbing all your resources in this deck. Tempted with the Borals because of how powerful they are, but I just feel like the rank 4s give you the most bang for your buck, considering you're able to put 2 of them on the field at the same time. So we're going for a rank 4 toolbox instead. We have Abyss Dweller, which basically deals with the graveyard. We have 𝗤𝗚𝖑𝖊𝖓, which deals with the field, kind of with that as well. Exciton Knight, this thing I threw last when I cut that instant fusion target, but I still think there's value in going for this. You're able to just sweep up everything with your Shade Brigandine and a Traptrix monster. Tornado Dragon is able to deal with the back row, so that helps you there. And then last card is just a copy of 𝕮𝗔𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖙. What you're doing is detaching a material to target 3 of your monsters in the graveyard. That could be your Traptrix Dianeas that you want to search, more Mantis if you need more fuel for the strategy, or just recycle your Seras, because again, like I mentioned, because of how weak it is, and you don't always keep it alive with your Traptrix or 𝗮𝗡𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖓𝖐. Sometimes just having extra copies that you could cycle into with a free draw is a nice little bonus for the theme. If you watched the video in its entirety, thanks! Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing the creation of this deck as much as I did putting it together. We'll start off with the main deck here. We have here triple Traptrix Dianea, triple Traptrix Mantis, triple Traptrix Murmilio or Murmileo, however you like to pronounce it, and a single copy of Traptrix Nepenthes, which puts us at a very slim 10 monsters in this 40 card deck. For a lone spell, we have Double or Nothing the Cheese. For our OTK, we got for trap cards then triple Bottomless Trap Hole, Compulsory Evacuation Device, Floodgate Trap Hole, Infinite Impermanence, Lost Wind, Solemn Strike, Shade Brigandine, the Phantom Knight's trap card, Torrential Tribute, and Trap Trick. And then breaking our triple trend, we have double Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare, again bringing us to a 40 card main deck there. Then for our extra deck, we have triple Traptrix Sarah, we have Mrs. Radiant. Then for our Xyz Toolbox rank 4, we have Abyss Dweller, 𝕮𝗔𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖙, Evil Swarm Exciton Knight, number 41 𝗵𝗍𝗔𝗓𝗏 the Terribly Tired Taper, Tornado Dragon, double Traptrix 𝗮𝗡𝗓𝗓𝖓𝗐, and then we have for the Utopia package, number 39 Utopia Double, number 39 Utopia Proper, number S39 Utopia Prime, and number S39 Utopia the Lightning for obviously a 15 card extra deck. That's it for now, but feel free to grab one of these videos on your way out. If you really enjoyed what you saw today, remember to subscribe to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.